Consider it done, sweetheart. Dad gloated, his arm clamped around Vanessa's waist like she was a prize he'd won at the county fair. She flashed those bleached teeth at me, the smile of someone who thought they'd beaten me. Tough shit. I planted my feet on the weathered porch boards of my Montauk cottage. 4 generations of Sullivan blood soaked into these timbers. My birthright. Well, Alexandra, I hope you're satisfied now, Dad taunted, dangling the keys before dropping them into his trophy wife's palm. 6 months married and 20 years his junior. Mom barely cold in her grave. Vanessa deserves a proper summer home. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, I smiled, the same shark smile Mom used right before she went for the jugular in her legal cases. I'm glad you're happy, Dad, but there's a catch. His smug face faltered. What catch? We signed the papers. Did you even bother reading page 4, paragraph 3? Dad snatched the contract from my hands hard enough to tear the corner. His eyes darted over the text like a trapped animal looking for escape. What are you talking about, Richard? Vanessa's voice lost its fake honey sweetness. She dug those blood-red talons into his forearm. I crossed my arms and leaned against the porch railing, the one my great-grandfather built with his own damn hands after fighting Nazis, the one my grandmother reinforced to withstand hurricanes, the one where my mother sat during her last summer, fighting cancer with more dignity than these two could ever understand. It says here that any transfer of ownership requires— Dad's voice died in his throat. Requires maintaining the historical integrity of the property, I finished, twisting the knife. No renovations without historical board approval, no modernization of certain features, and absolutely no selling for commercial development. Ever. Vanessa's face twisted like she'd bitten into something rotten. But I had plans. The interior is so dated. Those dated features are protected, I fired back. The original hardwood floors you wanted to rip out? Protected. The hand-carved banister you called rustic garbage? Protected. Even that wallpaper in the dining room you said made you physically ill last Christmas? Every damn inch protected. Dad's face reddened to match his golf club polo. Alexandra Morgan Sullivan, what have you done? Nothing Mom wouldn't have done herself, I said, straightening to my full height. She filed for the historical designation 2 years ago, before the cancer took her. Approval came through last month. I just didn't feel like mentioning it during your little property grab. Vanessa stormed past me, shoulder-checking me hard as she burst through the screen door. Through the window, I watched her ripping open drawers where she'd stashed her precious renovation plans and designer swatches. You always were Catherine's daughter, Dad said, anger mixing with reluctant respect. Stubborn as hell. Learned from watching you two go at it for 30 years, I shot back. You taught me to always read the fine print in business. Consider this your refresher course. Next morning, Vanessa's overpriced Mercedes was gone. Dad sat alone on the porch swing, nursing whiskey before noon. Mom's favorite spot to watch the sunrise. She bolted back to the city, he said without looking at me. Called her designer to cancel everything. I dropped down beside him on the swing, the familiar creak more satisfying than any victory speech. Sorry it came to this, I said. Are you? His bloodshot eyes, Sullivan blue like mine, finally met my gaze. I'm sorry you forced my hand, I clarified. Mom wanted this place preserved, not gutted and turned into some Hamptons showcase for your midlife crisis wife. He knocked back the rest of his drink. Your mother and I fought like hell toward the end, but she loved this decrepit old place beyond reason. It wasn't beyond reason, I fired back. This cottage holds our actual history, real memories, the blood, sweat, and tears of people who actually built something lasting. Dad slammed his glass down. Vanessa says I should fight the historical designation, says we could crush it with the right lawyers. Bring it, I challenged, watching gulls dive-bomb the waves. Mom's documentation is bulletproof, original blueprints, letters from great-grandpa while he built it during the war, photos from every decade. Plus, you signed the transfer agreement without contesting. You'll lose, and you know it. He exhaled heavily. You know she's never coming back here, right? Says it's either gut the cottage or she's done with Montauk altogether. A twinge of guilt hit me, but I squashed it flat. That's between you and your bride. Jesus, you're exactly like me sometimes, he muttered, like looking in a damn mirror. I hadn't expected that punch. Dad and I had been at war since he'd announced his engagement to Vanessa barely a year after we buried Mom. The ceasefire felt strange. There's something else you need to know, I said, yanking another document from my bag. Mom left a letter with her attorney, to be delivered to me if the cottage ever left Sullivan hands. Dad's eyes narrowed. What the hell does that mean? It means she knew you'd try to hand our legacy to Vanessa someday. I unfolded the letter, Mom's handwriting hitting me like a physical blow. She wrote that the historical designation was Plan B. Plan A was trusting you to honor what she died wanting. Let me see that, he demanded. I shoved the letter at him, watching his face as he read Catherine Sullivan's final thoughts. His hands trembled by the end. She knew me too damn well, he admitted, folding the letter with unusual care. Always did, even when I didn't want her to. We sat in heavy silence, the crash of waves the only sound between us. Remember when you broke your arm falling from that oak tree? Dad asked suddenly, jabbing his finger toward the massive oak at the property edge. I was building a crow's nest, I said, the memory sharp as broken bone. Mom was furious. At me, he corrected. She blamed me for pushing you to take stupid risks. We had it out right here on this porch. I remembered now. 11 years old, sitting inside with my fresh cast while my parents' voices carried through open windows like summer thunder. She was right, he admitted. Dad never admitted being wrong. About anything. Ever. I'd been bragging about my childhood treehouse, showing you pictures of how high I'd climbed. The confession blindsided me. This wasn't the father I knew, the one who was always right. Consequences be damned. That night after you finally fell asleep, we sat out here talking until sunrise. That's when we decided to build you the attic room instead. The star room, I whispered. The attic renovation had transformed the space into my bedroom, with skylights positioned to frame perfect constellations. Catherine designed every inch, Dad said. Said you could have the adventure without the broken bones. A compromise we could live with. Compromise. Foreign concept to Sullivan's. We'd both inherited the family stubborn streak that had skipped my gentle mother entirely. Vanessa wants to gut the attic for a home office, Dad confessed. She doesn't get why I dragged my feet even before this historical designation bomb dropped. I hadn't known that. I'd assumed he'd given his new wife carte blanche. Why did you hesitate? I demanded. He stared out at the horizon where blue met blue. Some things should stay sacred, I guess. Progress, microscopic, but still progress. I hadn't expected this conversation to crack the Sullivan armor. I have a proposition, I said, cutting to the chase. One that might work for everyone. Dad's eyebrow shot up, the expression so familiar it was like looking in a mirror. I'm listening. The historical designation blocks major structural changes and protects original features, but it doesn't stop updates to other things. Vanessa could modernize the kitchen appliances, bathroom fixtures, redo the landscaping. Not enough for her, Dad said flatly. She wants to knock out walls, blow out the floor plan. Then maybe this isn't her property, I fired back. But there's a solution that preserves Mom's wishes while giving Vanessa exactly what she wants. Which is, the Sanderson property next door is for sale. Has been for months. Modern construction, open concept, blank canvas for whatever high-end redesign fits her fancy. I shoved my phone at him with the listing pulled up. Dad studied the listing, interest sparking in his eyes. It's significantly more expensive than this place's market value. Yes, I agreed, but you wouldn't be handcuffed by historical guidelines. And I hesitated, then committed to my plan. We could co-own this cottage. Keep it Sullivan as Mom wanted. Split the maintenance costs. You and Vanessa could use it whenever you want a taste of actual beach life, instead of a magazine spread. He handed back my phone, calculation written across his face. You've thought this through. I have. And what happens when I die? What happens to my share then? The question hung between us like a storm cloud. Dad was pushing 70, still tough as nails, but undeniably mortal. That depends on what you want, I said carefully. But it should stay in the family. Maybe with Marcus eventually. My brother was deployed overseas with the Marines, third-generation military in the Sullivan line. Dad nodded slowly. Marcus always loved this dump more than you did. Truth. My brother embraced the cottage's quirks without complaint. I'd been the one demanding better Wi-Fi, modernized plumbing. I haven't talked to him about any of this, I admitted. With the time difference and security restrictions, he'd back you completely, Dad cut in. He was livid when I told him about giving the place to Vanessa. Didn't speak to me for weeks. This stunned me. Marcus had always been our peacemaker, Switzerland in family conflicts. Him taking sides spoke volumes. Have you considered what this place means to your children? I pushed. Not just me and Marcus, but what about the future? Any grandchildren would have zero connection to their heritage if this place becomes another of Vanessa's showcase properties. Dad's expression shifted at the mention of grandchildren. Raw spot. At 36, I remained single, married to my marine biology career. Marcus and his wife had been trying unsuccessfully for years. Your mother always said this place was for generations, he said quietly. Had this whole vision of grandkids racing down that path to the beach, like you and Marcus did. The path he pointed to was barely visible now, choked with beach grass after years of neglect. I made a mental note to clear it, regardless of how this standoff ended. I miss her, I said bluntly. We never talked about this. Dad had medicating his grief with a new wife. I'd buried myself in work. Marcus had re-enlisted. None of us had properly faced losing her. Every damn day, Dad replied, his voice like gravel. Even with Vanessa, it's not the same. Never could be. This was the most honest conversation we'd had since Mom died. The cottage had always been neutral territory where Sullivan's stubbornness seemed to wash away with the tide. Will you at least consider my offer? I pressed. Look at the Sanderson place. Talk to Vanessa about it. Dad raked a hand through his silver hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. I'll think about it. No promises. More than I'd expected. Sullivan pride typically prevented even this much ground given. "One more thing," I said, pulling a small wooden box from my bag. "Found this while cataloging items for the historical designation." Dad's eyes widened. Catherine's memory box. Mom had stored family treasures in the hand-carved box Dad had given her for their 10th anniversary, back when they were still crazy about each other. "Thought you might want to see what she kept," I said, placing it between us on the swing. With hands that weren't quite steady, Dad opened the box. On top lay a pressed beach rose from their wedding day. Beneath it, a collection of family history. Marcus's first lost tooth, a heart-shaped seashell I'd found at age 4. The cork from the champagne bottle they'd opened when Dad's company hit its first $1 million year. "She saved everything," he whispered, lifting out a faded photograph of the 4 of us on the porch, maybe 15 years back. I let him dig through the contents in silence, watching emotions crack through his carefully maintained facade. This was the father I remembered from before, capable of being moved by something other than business metrics. He stopped when he found a small velvet pouch at the bottom. Opening it carefully, he dumped a set of worn brass keys into his palm. "The original keys," he said. "Your great-grandfather had these made when he built the place." "Mom showed them to me once," I said. "Told me they weren't just keys to a building, but keys to our family's entire story. Said someday they'd be mine to pass down." Dad closed his fist around the keys, then shocked me by thrusting his hand toward me. "They should be yours now." I hesitated. "You sure about that?" "Catherine wanted you to have them, and she was right. This place belongs with someone who gets its value beyond square footage and property values." I took the keys, their weight heavier than their size suggested. "This doesn't fix everything," Dad warned. "Vanessa will still be pissed. She had her heart set on creating her dream beach house here." "The Sanderson place could be that for her," I pointed out. "Without the restrictions or the ghosts." Dad nodded slowly. "The ghosts are exactly what make this place matter to us, aren't they?" 3 days later, I pulled up to find Dad and Vanessa in the driveway beside her Mercedes. Their body language screamed serious discussion. I approached ready for battle. "Alexandra," Vanessa acknowledged me with a stiff nod. Her usual perfect appearance had slipped. Hair slightly out of place, designer outfit wrinkled. "We've been to see the Sanderson property," Dad announced, face unreadable. "And?" I kept my voice neutral, ready for anything. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. "It has potential. Better views than this place, actually." Coming from her, this was practically surrender. I didn't let my surprise show. "Realtor thinks they'd take an offer about 12% below asking," Dad continued. "It's been sitting empty longer than they want." I nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. With Dad, there was always an angle. "I've offered Vanessa a compromise," Dad said. "We buy the Sanderson property for her modern beach house vision. This cottage stays in the family, jointly owned by you and me for now, with provisions for Marcus in the future." Vanessa's lips thinned, but she didn't object. "You're actually okay with this?" I asked her directly. She exhaled sharply. "Your father showed me your mother's letter, and that memory box." Her expression softened fractionally. "I don't share your attachment to this place, but I know when I'm beat." Surprisingly diplomatic from Vanessa. I wondered what conversations they'd had these past 3 days. "There's one condition," Dad jumped in. "This place needs work. Not redesign, but actual maintenance. The roof leaks, the plumbing's shot, and the electrical system's a fire waiting to happen." Fair enough, I agreed. Those improvements won't violate the historical designation if they're done right. We split costs 50-50, Dad continued. I already called Hank Pearson about doing the work. He knows historical properties. Hank had been Mom's trusted contractor for years. He understood the cottage's value beyond square footage. Done, I said, then added, I want to clear the path to the beach too. Restore it like it was when Marcus and I were kids. Vanessa checked her watch. Richard, we need to go if we're making that lunch reservation in Southampton. Dad nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward and gripping my shoulder. Your mother would be proud of how you handled this, Alexandra. The compliment blindsided me. Thanks. As they drove away, I stood in the driveway, the brass keys heavy in my pocket. Something had shifted in our family dynamic, not fixed completely, but the first real movement in years. 1 month later, I sat on the porch swing with my laptop, hammering out a research paper on coastal ecosystem preservation. The cottage had undergone serious improvements. New roof, plumbing fixed, electrical up to code. Dad had been unexpectedly hands-on, stopping by daily to work with Hank. The screen door banged open, and Dad emerged with 2 steaming coffee mugs. He handed one to me before dropping onto the opposite end of the swing. Just got off the phone with Marcus, he announced. Deployment ends next month. He and Sarah want to stay for a week. Perfect, I said, already mentally clearing my schedule. Been too long since he's been home. Told him about our arrangement with the cottage. He approves. Of course he did. Marcus had always understood family peace better than either of us. How's the Sanderson place coming? I asked. Dad's face lightened. Closing next week. Vanessa's working with some hotshot architect who specializes in coastal modern designs. She's actually happy. And you? I challenged. He watched the waves pound the shore. Finding my way. After your mother, I made decisions fast. Too damn fast, probably. It was the closest he'd come to admitting that his whirlwind remarriage might have been grief-driven rather than carefully considered. Mom always said time at the cottage fixes most problems, I offered. Dad smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. She had a saying for everything, didn't she? Most of them were right. Damn straight. He gulped his coffee. Vanessa mentioned having you over for dinner once the renovations at the Sanderson place finish. You and whoever you might want to bring. The olive branch surprised me. I'd like that. As sunset painted the weathered porch gold, I realized something fundamental had been preserved here. Not just the structure, but something you couldn't put on a blueprint. The soul of the place. The connection to everyone who'd lived here before, and everyone who'd come after. Dad seemed to follow my thoughts. Your great-grandfather picked this exact spot because he said the sunset here reminded him what he'd fought a war for. A place where Sullivans could gather for generations. I nodded. 4 generations so far. More to come, I hope, he said quietly. I thought about the future, uncertain as always, but now with this constant. This anchor where our family could return when life got too complicated, where problems simplified in the rhythm of waves against shore. There will be, I said with absolute certainty. Mom made damn sure of that. Dad reached over and gripped my hand hard, just for a second. Yes, she did.